Now available in paperback and e-readers. Spellbound, a darker shade of black. Get your copy today at your favorite online bookseller. Now available in paperback and e-readers. Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door takes on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess featuring a bonus pin-up and the other 2 books in the Cyber Goddess saga at online booksellers everywhere today. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, because we're having us a barbecue. I have been a fan of Loose Collector's custom action figures ever since I saw them on the Foosh message boards in the mid-2000s. And in the mid-2000s, Loose Collector used to post pictures of his custom action figures of Marvel Comics and DC Comics characters and independent comic characters, and even sometimes creator-owned characters, and it would really just blow me away to see the incredibly dynamic sculpting he would do on these customs, not to mention the paintwork that really just popped and brought those characters to life as custom action figures. And when I heard Loose Collector was going from making custom action figures to manufacturing action figures back in 2020, I really got excited, and when the pre-orders came out for several of those figures, I quickly put them in because I wanted to support Loose Collector, a fellow customizer and toy collector, and I wanted to see his business grow. And the first couple of figures I put in pre-orders for was for the Coffin Comics Lady Death. This was one of the first Loose Collector figures I put in an order for in 2021. And in 2021, I also went to a foreign website and picked up his Darna action figure, which was the first action figure in the Loose Collector line. And after that, I heard about the Dynamite 3 of Red Sonja, Vampirella, and Purgatory, and put in my pre-orders at executive replicas for the Vampirella and Red Sonja. And while I liked the quality of them so much, I put in a pre-order for Purgatory at Big Bad Toy Store, and then followed that up by picking up other characters such as Critter, and then picked up Billy Tucci's She action figure. And I have really enjoyed many of these Loose Collector figures up until La Muerta, because La Muerta basically is a figure that I see as a major turning point as a turn for the worse in terms of quality as related to Loose Collector figures. Now, I have had my issues with Loose Collector figures such as this She action figure. Now, this She action figure basically is one where I started to see a major turn for the worse in terms of quality for Loose Collector figures. And that figure, again, basically I started to see issues with this figure because of the whole overall quality control. I mean, while this figure, She has a swappable head, the peg is so tight on the head that it just is hard to pull it off. Just with like Marvel Legends, you can easily pop and swap the heads. Even Valaverse, you can pop and swap the heads. But with this figure of She, everything was just so awkward in terms of the overall design that the figure just really, you feel like it's going to break if you pull things the wrong way. And the plastic just really didn't feel as high quality as previous Loose Collector figures that I've had in my collection. And things seem to be taking a turn for the worse in terms of quality as related to Loose Collector figures. And this figure of Muerta is one of the worst that I've seen in terms of quality, and I really wasn't happy with the overall quality of this figure, and it just is one big disappointment because I was expecting far better for this character, a character that I really liked and I was eager to get a figure of, but this figure really just doesn't match the level of quality of previous Loose Collector figures or even other figures from competing companies that are independent of Hasbro or McFarlane. I mean, I've seen better quality on other figures, and I'll go in depth on that as I unbox this figure in this video. Now in the box, La Muerta looks just like her Coffin Comics counterpart in the Coffin verse, Lady Death, which I got back in about 2021, and both of the boxes look very similar aesthetically. Unfortunately, while the La Muerta box is a little bigger, it doesn't have the same level of quality that the Lady Death figure has. Now, if you look at the Lady Death figure in the box, the paint apps are a lot nicer on Lady Death. We've got some nice shading. We've got some nice tones as related to her flesh tone and the cape and the hair. So when we look at La Muerta in the box, the paint isn't as nice as Lady Death's was. And as I pull Lady Death away and I open up the La Muerta box, I'll get into why this figure's quality basically has dropped and show you what really is really wrong with this figure. And it really has to do with the whole efforts to try to make this figure be engineered to be a bit more aesthetically pleasing. And that whole effort was basically overthought as I see it. Now that we've got the La Muerta figure out of the box, I'll go over all of the accessories that come with this figure. And the accessories with this figure are nice and really fit this character, who basically is like a Latina female version of the Punisher. And we get a lot of great accessories, such as 3 rifles, 2 pistols, and looks like 3 sets of hands, and a utility belt that's separate from the figure. And I'm really happy with the whole set of accessories because they really fit the character overall. But the real problem with La Muerta has to do with the engineering of how you get this belt on the torso. And the way you get this belt on the torso is what starts the real serious issues as related to the decline of quality control over at Loose Collector, because they basically overthought this, and they overthought it, and it basically led to this figure basically becoming one of the worst figures in the line. Now, in addition to the really weak paint and the just windswept hairstyle I didn't like, this La Muerta figure is over-engineered, and over-engineered in a way that basically overthinks something very simple as related to this character's overall design. Now, Loose Collector, what he wanted to do was continue on the whole torso removability that he did with the She figure, because when he made the She figure, he basically wanted to make a version of the character where you could either display it as the younger version of She that was featured in the 90s with her 90s style costume, or make her like you could display her in the recent appearances that she's had in Billy Tucci's crowdfunded comics, where she is now wearing this skirt instead of not wearing one, and he wanted to make it where you could change it out by swapping the torso. Unfortunately, that engineering on She really didn't work very well, because when I got this figure, one of the problems I had with this figure was that the upper torso was extremely tight, and when you pulled on the upper torso, you basically felt like you were gonna break the figure. I mean, that basically, and this whole side slit basically was a nightmare, because you feel like this whole side slit right here is gonna feel like it's gonna tear every time you take it off the upper torso. And that whole engineering design basically didn't work very well with the She figure, and basically was like the mark of the decline in quality for Loose Collector. And things got progressively worse with La Muerta. With La Muerta, it gets progressively worse, because while Loose Collector wanted to, again, separate the utility belt that La Muerta carries her weapons in, and have it where you could put it on the figure yourself, this creates a situation where it creates a problem with, 1, the articulation of the figure, and 2, makes it where this figure basically is hard to be able to pose, because there's a problem with the upper torso ball connecting to the lower ball. And I'll show you that in a minute, because you've got to get this upper torso off in order to put her utility belt on. And in order to put her utility belt on, again, you have to take the torso off and then slide the torso the belt over the lower torso, then reattach the upper torso if you can. And once you reattach it, this is how La Muerta is supposed to be having her utility belt. And again, this is a bit of a nightmare, because while it's a nice idea as related to engineering, it doesn't work in execution. And doesn't work in execution because, yeah, you can take the torso apart, but the whole problem is that the upper torso, you wind up sacrificing a level of articulation, that we still manage to preserve somewhat on the She figure. On She, we basically can move the lower torso all around. Unfortunately, on La Muerta, when you try to move the upper torso, what happens is it pops and separates from the figure, and you wind up losing that level of articulation on the upper torso. Now, the upper torso does have a nice forward motion and side to side, but you can't really move it too far to the side or else it'll pop off the body like this. It'll just pop right off the body, and that's really not something I would want to consider a level of quality on a figure that costs $70. No, this figure costs way too much to have this level of poor quality as related to the engineering. And again, a level of engineering that basically did not need to be there, because once I put this figure back in a plastic tray, the belt basically stayed there. So we really didn't need to take the belt off. You could have just left the belt on and everything would have been fine as related to this figure. But the whole thing is, this whole belt feature basically makes it where this figure is basically an overpriced figure as related to quality. Because what I find to be sad is that, you know, I look at my Valaverse Gemini. Valaverse Gemini, basically, she comes with this belt attached, and it's not a problem. Comes attached from the factory, but La Muerta, basically costing twice as much as Gemini, just doesn't really feel on the level of quality. I just don't feel that level of quality. And that's the other issue I have with LooseCollector's La Muerta. This figure is, again, a big-time disappointment when you consider that this figure costs $70. I mean, it's not on the same level of Gemini as related to quality, and that's another issue I have, because Gemini basically feels sturdy. I mean, Gemini feels like one of the most durable figures I have in my collection. I mean, she feels even better than some Hasbro figures and Mattel figures that I have in my collection. Meanwhile, when it comes to La Muerta basically feels very flimsy, and she doesn't feel as strong and as related to as even previous Loose Collector figures, and the plastic just isn't on that same level of quality that I got with previous Loose Collector figures. No, when it came to previous Loose Collector figures, I mean, even with the over-engineering of she feels very sturdy. And even on the case of Betty from the Rocketeer, I mean, Betty feels absolutely solid in my hands. And when it comes to Red Sonja feels absolutely solid in my hands. And again, basically, with this Red Sonja figure, you can just clearly see the night and day comparison in terms of quality. I mean, you can see the just night and day comparison. I mean, here's the paintwork on Red Sonja. We have this beautiful shading. You have a figure that is, again, really solid plastic and just feels strong in your hands. Now, the elbow joints ain't that great overall on Red Sonja, but the whole thing is you can move her torso all around and get that great range of movement. You can get a great range of movement on Red Sonja, but you really can't get it on La Muerta. I mean, La Muerta, again, pops right off the torso, and that's a real serious problem. And I really can't move these arms like I want to move them, because I'm afraid I'm going to break them, because the plastic just feels so flimsy. I mean, it doesn't feel as strong as the previous plastics that were used on Red Sonja, or the plastics on Betty from the Rocketeer. I mean, Betty just feels very, very solid. But, you know, I look at this figure, again, I was just deeply disappointed. I was deeply disappointed because this figure is a mark in the decline of quality over at Loose Collector. And I'm really sad to see a decline in quality, because Loose Collector has some great sculpts and had great paint in the past, but I don't see it on this figure. Now, I know an all-black figure can be a challenge to do as related to flesh tones, but I believe in the case of the torso, maybe you could have just did the flesh tones and put black paint over it. I don't know about much about toys, but I really know that this toy is a major disappointment. A major disappointment because, again, when I compare this figure to other independent figures, such as DC Collectibles. Now, I know DC Collectibles is defunct, but this Catwoman is one of the best made figures I have had out of that line when it was out. And again, I put Gemini up because Bobby Valla basically took things to the next level in terms of quality. I mean, with Gemini is feeling more like a Fisher-Price little tykes in terms of quality. I mean, the torso is solid. The articulation is solid. The figure, again, feels very durable when you move it, and feels very durable, again, and you don't feel like you're going to break it. You can have confidence in working the articulation in this figure. Now, the DC Collectibles is a little bit more of a different, but the whole thing is it still feels, the articulation feels very sturdy, and you feel like you can move a joint and not feel like it's going to snap in your hands. I mean, this DC Collectibles, again, feels very solid in your hands when you're working with it. But with La Muerta, you don't really feel that at all. And again, when I look at this, again, $28 for Catwoman, $33 for Gemini. And again, both of those figures cost half the price, but are feeling like they are a higher quality than the $70 figure, which basically feels like it's got waxy plastic and doesn't really feel like it has that range of motion. And overall, that basically is a disappointment all around when you consider, again, this is supposed to be a premium toy line of an independent character and may possibly be the only version of this independent character we may get, but it doesn't really feel like, again, a figure that you would want to spend this kind of money on. I mean, I spent it because, again, I'm a fan of this character, but I just look at this and, again, it's a big disappointment all around. Because I expect better from Loose Collector. I've seen him do better with other figures, but this figure basically, again, doesn't really show us a turn for the better, but a turn for the worse, and possibly is a sign of growing pains over at Loose Collector. Possibly a sign of growing pains because he just basically is trying to over-engineer these figures when you just basically just need to keep it real simple. Keep it real simple because all you needed to do was just put the belt on at the factory and then let the people decide what they want to do. I mean, the whole removable torso thing is basically, it doesn't really work here because the hole basically isn't making it where the torso can stay connected to the body. And it just made for a mess with this figure next to the windswept hair. Again, I'm not a fan of this windswept hair thing going on. I wanted a she with a straight hair that went down because I want to display my figures in basic vanilla poses. And I'm not a fan of, again, the really tight joint holes as related to the head and the torso because they make it feel like these joints are going to break. And these are the issues I have with Loose Collector lately because I've been a big fan of his figures. I was a big fan of his previous figures like Darna, a big fan of the Dynamite 3, and a fan of the Critter action figure, and all the and figures like Betty. I'm trying to get the Rocketeer. I got Betty on eBay, but the whole thing is I've been a fan of his figures, the articulation setup, the paint work, everything has been nice to this point. But La Muerta basically is like the death of this line in terms of quality. The death of this line, it just isn't up to par. And not up to par because it just isn't there for me. Again, La Muerta has all of the basic articulation, like the head that goes up and down like this, but not very far. This torso that's just, again, a nightmare to work with. She has some bicep swivels, double elbows, wrist articulation, double knees, ball jointed hips. I'm afraid to move the hips out because I heard what happened with T-Man 978's figure that broke at the crotch. And she's got the thigh articulation at the middle of the thigh, double knees, and got nice calf swivel the first time I've seen it. It's done very well here on a Loose Collector figure, and it's got those nice ankle tilts. I mean, the articulation is great, but the overall build quality and engineering of this figure is the real disappointment with this figure. And this is one figure I just can't recommend because the quality just isn't there. I mean, it's not there for a figure that costs $70. No, for $70, I expect higher quality plastic. For a $70 figure, I'm expecting higher quality paint, because the way this torso is painted, to me, is unacceptable for a figure that costs $70. I mean, for $70, I'm expecting a lot better paint work than this. I mean, if Bobby Valla can give us this for $33, and DC Collectibles can give us this for $28, and basically Loose Collector was giving us figures on the level of She and Red Sonja for $70, I got them for $54, but the level of quality is much higher. And when he came out with figures like Lady Death, again, Lady Death is of higher quality in terms of paint than La Muerta, and I would hate to see this be the death of Loose Collector, because I believe he's a great sculptor and a great painter, but he just needs to really work on his quality control, needs to focus on his quality control, because this figure is far below the standard I have seen for Loose Collector figures. And with this type of figure, if it's going to be the standard, I may have to stop buying Loose Collector figures. Now, the latest figure I want to get is Zombie Tramp, that Dan Mendoza is going to have as part of his Kickstarter, but that may be the last figure I buy, because the quality just doesn't seem to be there, in comparison to other previous independent toy manufacturers. I mean, if other manufacturers can go out here and give us figures on the level of Bobby Valla, with Bobby Valla, this Gemini is, again, that's like premium level. I mean, that figure feels like a figure that costs way more than La Muerta. And if this figure is, again, $70, it has again, build that is the highest quality. I mean, it's higher than SH Figure Arts and other independent people that I've bought toys from. I mean, when I think of high quality, again, this Gemini has the highest quality, and I wish that that type of manufacturing quality was what Loose Collector had, and he needs to get his stuff up to this standard as related to not only the engineering of his figures, but the build and quality control, because, again, Gemini feels like, again, a figure that costs way more money and has higher quality, but this La Muerta basically feels like it's dead on arrival and feels like one of the biggest duds of the Loose Collector line. A big dud because I was expecting much better from an independent toy company, expecting much better in terms of sculpt, of paint work, and as related to the hair, because this hair sculpt, really go back to the just plain hair sculpts, because a lot of us vanilla posers, we don't want all of this hair basically being swept, because it looks completely out of place compared to other figures in a display. We want basic hair sculpts. We want and we want the head to be able to move. Again, the windswept look, you can do that as an alternate head, but give us a plain standard head. And when it comes to the paintwork, again, really these flesh tones are way off. And again, I'm not happy with this figure, and it really hurts me to, again, make this review, because this figure, I was looking forward to this figure because I loved reading La Muerta comic, but the figure based on the comic doesn't feel like one that came off the comic page and was dipped in plastic. No, it feels like something that's just tragic, because here's a character that basically should have been a slam dunk and a hit out of the park, and sadly this figure isn't a hit, it's just a strikeout. Now, if you want to pick up some of the books on my SJS Direct universe, you can find those books such as the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my sorority novel, The Thetas, or my vampire novel, Eternal Night. You can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct comics, you can pick up my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, on Lulu.com. And you can find Esteem No Good Deed along with John Haynes at Death's Door on Amazon and Comixology by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to see me be able to do more action figure reviews and be able to pay for more action figures, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Amari's Revenge. The goddess next door is confronted by a Nubian queen out for revenge at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in this inaugural Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Amari's Revenge in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere.